Every fantasy relevant running back ranked for week 6. Diving straight in with the S tier, it is skinny. Only 2 propping up that elite tier for us this week. Jonathan Taylor and Bijan Robinson. Tom, why are these 2 a cut above the rest when it comes to rankings this week?
Well, you look at what they've been doing, what their matchups are, that kind of stuff, and it becomes very difficult to knock Jonathan Taylor at any point. The Cardinals rank 13th in fantasy points allowed. They are a sneaky good defense, but they're definitely not one which you can't score on. We saw that last week, didn't we? And then you look at Bijan Robinson and Buffalo, their kind of weakness has been on the ground to the running game. They rank 28th in rush defense EPA allowed, whereas the pass, they rank 11th best. So it's like they're very much a run funnel. And I think that's what we're going to see from the Falcons. They'll come out with a run heavy plan and really go to town on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in the A tier, we have got Christian McCaffrey, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, and Jamar Gibbs. Tom, Christian McCaffrey on the ground is really struggling. He's inefficient. The Bucks are, in my opinion, the best run defense in the league. They're absolutely phenomenal at stuffing the run up the middle. Is this too much to just rely purely on that receiving talent, or do we think we could potentially look at pivoting away from Christian McCaffrey for things like DFS? Obviously, you're probably still going to have to plug and start him if you're in a managed league.
Yeah, I mean, in managed leagues, it's always really difficult to even consider benching some of these guys. Last week, I was doing a Fancy Pro Start Sit show a couple hours before kickoff, and we got so many Jamar Chase questions. And then you see what Jamar Chase does in garbage time there. It's like you run the risk if you ever bench somebody like Christian McCaffrey. I think your point about Tampa being one of the very best defenses that there are is absolutely valid, and it's absolutely valid to worry about him because he hasn't looked good rushing the ball whatsoever this year. He's just absolutely making hay because of what he does in the receiving game. He scored 95.7 PPR points via receiving. That's more than every wide receiver not named Puka, Amon-Ra, Mecca Egbuka, and JSN. That's via JJ Zacharyson on Twitter. Just absolute peak stat. But yeah, I don't think that he's going to be able to run with ease on the Bucks. The Bucks have been shutting down the run at a really good rate. They have the 8th best run defense, and I think that it's largely going to come down to him catching the ball. And I think that's kind of what the Niners still need with him having, been one of the only reliable players out there this year. I mean, you go back though to the last 2 games he played against the Bucks. So this was one last year where he had 39 rushing yards. And then the previous time was in 2023, and he only had 70 rushing yards, but he hasn't scored a touchdown in either of his last 2 appearances against him. They've played him pretty well. Even in the receiving game, he's kind of got there a little bit, but never been over, like not been at ridiculous numbers. So I think they understand how to play him, and it's by no means an easy matchup.
Yeah, and then Jamar Gibbs rounding out the tier. We saw last week it was more of a 50-50 split with Jamar Gibbs and David Montgomery, which has not been the trend throughout this year. Part of that was the Bengals. Part of that was David Montgomery playing for the first time in his hometown of Cincinnati. Do you think we're going to see a return to 60-65% share of the backfield for Jamar Gibbs this week in a really juicy matchup against the Chiefs that could be a must-win for the Chiefs?
Yeah, it's definitely must win. It's in Kansas City, which makes a difference. Jared Goff, obviously not the most prolific quarterback on the road, and it's a game which I expect to be really good for points because you look at the amount of like the best teams at reaching their opponent's end zone. And the Chiefs rank second with 43% of their drives getting there, and the Lions rank third at 42%. So, like, these are teams that are used to scoring highly. And I do think you can run on the Chiefs. I mean, they haven't given up huge points so far, but they haven't really faced good running backs like Derrick Henry last week. I'm not including because the Ravens just were so in their feelings as soon as that game began. But yeah, I expect to see slightly more for Jahmyr Gibbs, and I expect him to have a good game, but possibly not like a slate-breaking game.
Yeah, and before we move into that B tier, hit that subscribe button down below. We've got these ranking shows for you every single week. Dynasty buy selves, waivers, and everything you need to be bringing home that championship this year. The B tier is a big one this week. Devon Achan, Javonte Williams, Kyron Williams, Rico Dowdle, Ashton Genty, Brees Hall, James Cook, and Quinshon Judkins. Tom, Rico Dowdle was the talk of the town last week. 200 yards on the ground, and he is our running back 10 this week. Absolutely bonkers. Do you think it's plug and play RB1, or you got any nervousness against this Dallas defense?
I mean, I picked him up and I started him in my home league, and he was definitely one of the players that earned me a win last week because of it. The Cowboys, they rank 6th in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. They haven't been good against the run all year. As you mentioned, 200 yards, but he also had 85% of Carolina's running back rush attempts and had a 15% target share. Chuba Hubbard hasn't touched those numbers this year. I think that we're going to see another really strong performance, but let's be real, when it comes down to the Panthers at the minute, it all comes down to what's Bryce Young doing? Is Bryce Young able to sustain a drive? Because otherwise, if you put in Dowdle in 3rd and long or 2nd and long very quickly, then it's going to be a very slow, difficult night. And that's really the only way I see him potentially failing.
Yeah, and you're saying 85% running back rush share, 15% target share. It would have been better if he wasn't suffering from cramp as well. Like, he had to leave the field purely because he needed to get a massage and try and alleviate some of that issues. James Cook feels very low this week. Obviously, not the easiest matchup, but not often you see him outside of our top 12. Are you very concerned, or do you still feel like he's a plug and play option for you?
Well, the Falcons have allowed the fewest running back fantasy points so far. They also rank 7th in, they rank well in rush defense EPA. They've shut down the run continuously. They give up plays, but they don't allow massive runs throughout. And I'm very high on Atlanta's defense in general. It's kind of reflecting across our rankings, where I've got Josh Allen a little bit lower. And I think that James Cook is still quite dependent on his touchdowns. Yes, he's doing more, and yes, he's getting used slightly more, but you take away the touchdowns, and much like any player, it really hurts their value. And I'm just not sure if this is a game. I don't expect the 48.5 over-under on this game, I think, is high, and I think it'll be lower scoring than that.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like we say this about every single fantasy piece on the Bills offense. You could say the same about Dalton Kincaid. You could say the same about Josh Allen. It's touchdown reliant, but at the moment the touchdowns are happening. So yeah, it's tough to get too far away from James Cook. As much as it is a tough matchup, still rocking it in the B tier. Moving into our C tier, we're kicking it off with Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt, then Rashad White, Cam Scatterbo, Travis Etienne, Derrick Henry, and J.K. Dobbins. Tom, Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt, obviously phenomenal production last week, put up 27 PPR points, but didn't even see 50% of the snaps. Are you viewing that as a positive, that he could see even more work and even bigger share of his backfield? Or do you view that as a negative, that he put up big points on a small number of snaps and it could regress this week?
Well, I mean, he might have not seen the snap shares, but he had 70% of the running back share. And as long as you're getting the touches when the running backs are actually being used, I think that's kind of okay. Coming up against this Chicago team, we've already kind of talked about it in some of the other rankings videos, but they rank 4th in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. They do not have a good run defense. They've really struggled all year. I thought that we were going to get a better product from Dennis Allen. And it's just kind of a little bit weird that the Commanders are still not using JCM to start games. Like, he doesn't play very much on the first drive of the second drive. But then after that, it just seems to slowly build and become more and more Bill as the game goes on. So no, I've got no worries about him. I think for this game, Chicago at Washington, 50-point over-under, that's one which I do see being plentiful for points, and I'd be very happy starting him as my RB2, RB3 this week.
Yeah, and another player that you are always happy to see succeed and do well, J.K. Dobbins. We saw the week before last, RJ Harvey start to emerge, start to split work, and then bang, straight back to it last week. This is J.K. Dobbins' backfield and doesn't appear to be changing. You see numbers 80% running back rush share, 52% of snaps. Do you think that he could keep this up for the rest of the season, or do you think this is potentially a sell high moment for J.K. Dobbins?
Well, the haters are definitely expecting him to blow out his knee, his legs to fall off at any given part. And it's like, it's just a bit. For me, it's just fantastic to see J.K. Dobbins looking pretty good. And the same can be said for Javonte Williams. Like, these are guys who suffered really excruciatingly bad injuries and have come back to be now not superstars, not even stars, but functional running backs with good talent in the league. And there aren't that many of them. And I think that Dobbins going against the Jets, which is the important part of it, a team who've allowed the ninth most fantasy points to the running back position, ranked bottom 12 in EPA per rush attempt. Like, that's a good matchup for him. Yes, we don't really know what Sean Payton's going to do game to game. We can struggle with that. But I think that we can expect Dobbins still to have quite a dominant workload, enough where we can start him with confidence. The issue comes when Tyler Bede starts mixing in more and more. And that seems to be up and down and completely fluctuating. Like, last week he played 4 more snaps than RJ Harvey. Is that going to happen again? Are we going to see him play so many snaps that it eats into J.K. Dobbins' work? Honestly, like, anyone who says they know the answer to that is lying, but I do think that Dobbins has earned his confidence at this point.
Yeah, I think, and he looks good. Let's be honest. Like, he looks explosive, he looks smooth, and yeah, I think, as you said, he very much has earned that spot. Before we move into the detail, though, if you've got any other start sit questions or you want to pick our brains on a trade, get them in the comments below. Tom and I will answer all of those. Moving into the detail, it's another big one. David Montgomery, Jalen Warren, DeAndre Swift, Tony Pollard, Alvin Kamara, Kenneth Walker, Michael Carter, Chase Brown, and Ramondre Stevenson. Tom, this week, we've obviously seen the Joe Flacco trade to the Bengals. I was expecting a lot of questions about T. Higgins, maybe a few about Jamar Chase, but I've had so many conversations and questions in my DMs about what to do with Chase Brown. Does this mean better upside? Does this mean he's going to start producing? Obviously, incredibly tough matchup this week against Green Bay in Green Bay, but have you got any hope that Chase Brown can turn it around?
Not really, no. And if anybody does have hope, I'll happily trade you some Chase Brown shares because it's looked pretty bleak. But like, the Bengals thinking that Joe Flacco is the answer is just, it's so classic Bengals. And maybe it works out short term, but Joe Flacco wasn't particularly playing well in Indy last year. He hasn't played well for the Browns. Like, outside of one stretch a couple of years ago, he looks like a 40-year-old quarterback. And he ranks second worst in EPA per drop back, and he's gone from PFF's 30th ranked offensive line to the 29th ranked offensive line. This isn't some big upgrade on either side of things for the Bengals or for Joe Flacco. And maybe he gets the ball out on time and it helps Chase Brown, but Chase Brown has been utterly awful on the ground game. He's surviving purely through the passing game, which, excellent, great. We love to see it. That's a big part of how to succeed in PPR. But at a certain point, you've really got to start producing just even mediocre results on the ground to be able to make it worthwhile. And like, Chase Brown just isn't explosive. He's had 83 touches without a 15-plus yard gain this year. The next nearest is Dylan Sampson at 31. So 52 more touches without gaining 15 yards. And sooner or later, I think that is going to play into him losing touches to the guys behind him.
Yeah, it's the most disappointing thing is when you think back to his rookie year when he started to see touches, it was, a screened pass in space, any touch in space. It felt like he could take the ball to the house. He was explosive. He could score from anywhere. And now he's settled into this volume-based running back that isn't explosive, can't score from anywhere, and he's just getting production because of sheer volume of touches. And yeah, it doesn't feel
Sounds like
particularly
2019 Josh Jacobs.
good. Very much so.
Yeah,
Right,
but I
moving.
mean, also just on the Packers, like everything we've seen from their run defense, aside from getting gashed by Quinton Judkins, like there's no reason for me to think that Chase Brown is suddenly going to start looking like a good running back against them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now moving into our E tier, we've got Trevion Henderson, Kenny Gainwell, RJ Harvey, Kareem Hunt, Zach Charbonnet, Isaiah Pacheco. Tom, lots of people spent some serious capital on Trevion Henderson in the preseason. Seems like despite the fact that Ramondre Stevenson has now fumbled 10 times in his last 20 games, still can't get removed from the field. Obviously, Antonio Gibson tore his ACL and is done for the year. Do you think that Trevion Henderson is going to start seeing some more work, or is it just that he's not playing well right now and he is kind of starting to press the issue a little bit? And I think that's part of the reason why he's being kept off the field.
Yeah, well, I mean, last week the snap share split was 50% Ramondre, 48% Trevion. So you could say that we have started to see a glimpse of it improving. Maybe that's because of Antonio Gibson tearing his ACL, or maybe they just were looking to start giving him more touches on the back of Ramondre in previous weeks, just, dropping the ball on the floor. Now, I would say the big reason for hope for me here is they play the Saints, who rank 12th in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. They are fairly good against the run. They do have a top 10 defense against the run, but they just tend to break down over time and give up fantasy points. And obviously, fantasy points and EPA are very much different measurements. So I think it can be all right here. I think that Henderson could have a reasonable game by his standards, but the problem really is that the standards expected when you drafted him in like the third round of home leagues, like we expected much better and we expected much better sooner than now, but Mike Vrabel hasn't seemed to be in the mood for it. So if you have a better option, he's firmly at the point where he's not a must-start player, even in your flex. Like it's okay to wait and see on him.
Yeah, definitely. I think you need to see it before you believe it with him, definitely. And rounding it out with our F tier, we have got Hassan Haskins, Chris Rodriguez, Condre Miller, Kamani Vidal, Justice Hill, Tyler Algier, Sean Tucker, Blake Corum, Baishal Tootin, and Brashard Smith. Tom, I'm going to very briefly touch on Hassan Haskins, Kamani Vidal. A lot of people will have spent some fab on them in waivers this week. The Dolphins are the worst rush defense in the league, allowing 0.17 EPA per rush. That's almost MVP quality for through the air. They're allowing it on the ground. Do you feel any level of confidence in either of these guys if you are in a sticky situation and desperate for, let's call it a flex play in there?
Well, let's be real about Kamani Vidal. Like, he had his chance last year when it was Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, and J.K. Dobbins was banged up on IR. Kamani Vidal couldn't get himself any touches. Gus Edwards was completely out of juice. Kamani Vidal couldn't get himself any touches. This year, training camp, gets cut, comes back via the practice squad. Like, this team has done nothing to tell us that they think Kamani Vidal is the answer. But Hassan Haskins is somebody who Jim Harbaugh really likes. Like they played together. Well, they were together at Michigan, and he's consistently turned to him at various points. Last week, Haskins played 8 of 9 snaps immediately after the injury, and Haskins has been the primary backup on early downs over the last 2 weeks. So now going into a game where they should have a positive or at least a neutral game script throughout, and if they're looking to establish the run, then against this very, very weak run defense, Haskins is probably the better guy. Of course, there's a little bit of trepidation around the state of the Chargers' offensive line at the tackle positions, but I'm expecting Haskins to still be more fantasy viable than Vidal.
Yeah, but I think to me that reinforces the issues on the offensive line, reinforces the fact that this is a Haskins week, because if you've got trouble with your bookend tackles, if they're out injured, you've got a poor offensive line, what are you going to do? You're going to run the ball. You're going to try to protect them. You're not going to get them to sit back against a competent pass rush and say, yeah, defend this guy on the edge for 3.5 seconds. You're going to say, right, let's get you moving forward. Let's try and pound the rock, and let's try and make your life easier and keep it in manageable down and distance. So, yeah, I think this is a Haskins week. I've definitely got him a few chunks ahead of Vidal, and yeah, he's the person that I would be more comfortable starting this week. And that is it. Let's keep it simple though. You've made it this far into the video. Like, subscribe, hit that hype button. It really does help. And of course, check out these other videos on your way out.